You need strategic alignment about what the business is trying to do. If we have marketing thought of as a tactic within an organization and they're not at that table, that's going to fall apart immediately.
Marketing Architects.
Hello, and welcome to the Marketing Architects, a research-first podcast dedicated to answering your toughest marketing questions. I'm Elena Jasper. I run the marketing team here at Marketing Architects, and I'm joined by my co-hosts, Angela Voss, the CEO of Marketing Architects, and Rob DeMars, the Chief Product Architect of Misfits and Machines.
Hello.
Welcome back, Angela. It's been a little bit.
Yes, it has been. I'm excited to be back.
Things are going to start to get real smart around here with Angela back.
I know it's been rough without you, Ange. Dealing with Rob.
You guys. Hardly.
All right, we're back with our thoughts on some recent marketing news, always trying to root our opinions in data, research, and what drives business results. Today, we're talking about the CEO-CMO relationship. What are some of the common challenges in creating a healthy relationship? What are some solutions to problems? We'll share some of our own experiences seeing successful CEO and CMO partnerships and what they have in common. And I'll kick us off, as I always do, with some research. I actually chose another podcast for this one. It's from McKinsey, and it's titled Analyzing the CEO-CMO Relationship and Its Effect on Growth. During the podcast, Robert Tass discusses with host Roberta Fusaro the importance of a strong CEO-CMO partnership and how it impacts a company's growth. According to a McKinsey survey, companies where CEOs put marketing at the core of their growth strategies are twice as likely to experience over 5% annual growth. But despite this, many companies face challenges aligning their marketing strategies with their overall business goals. Taz highlights that while CEOs often recognize the importance of marketing, there's a disconnect in the C-suite. 90% of CEOs believe they understand marketing's benefits, but only 50% of CMOs feel the same way. And this gap can create misaligned priorities, particularly in defining the role of marketing and connecting marketing activities to measurable business outcomes. They also talk about the evolution of marketing roles with the rise of titles like Chief Growth Officer or Chief Digital Officer, which can fragment traditional marketing responsibilities. And they argue that CMOs must secure their place at the strategy table rather than being relegated to more executional roles. They should also be accountable for business outcomes, helping CEOs understand how investments in marketing lead to growth. So Ange and Rob, you've both witnessed all different kinds of CEO-CMO relationships at the brands we've partnered with at Marketing Architects over the years since we are an agency. So let's start with this. Have we experienced this disconnect between CEOs and CMOs, and do we think it's prevalent enough and significant enough to impact a brand's growth when it exists?
I'm so curious to hear how aligned we are on this. We've been working together for a long time. So how aligned are we on what we think we've observed? I personally have seen this go both ways. I've seen it go really well, and I've seen the relationship fall short of reaching that full potential. Often you'll hear marketing folks talk about other areas of the business, or maybe even the CEO not really getting marketing's full value. And the irony, I think, in that is that there's actually no one person better situated than the CEO to recognize marketing's full value. It's really difficult, I think, without a strong CEO-CMO relationship for a marketing team to even know their full value, because it extends so much further than just driving traffic or leads. So you're sort of at a disadvantage just because of the perch you sit on as a CMO. We've seen how effective marketing helps drive investor interest. Obviously, that's something that a CEO cares a lot about. The CMO probably cares about that too, but they're so tied into traffic and leads and brand awareness and things like that. Marketing plays a vital role in employee retention and attraction. Who else than a CEO cares more about attracting top talent and keeping your best people engaged? What's the impact of marketing on something like negotiations with retailers and partners? Again, the perch for a CMO just isn't quite right to be able to see those impacts kind of beyond the traditional KPIs and accountabilities that a marketing team is responsible for.
Yeah, I'm going to go with a lot of what Angela just said there. Most CEOs and CMOs that I speak to think I'm there to bring the sandwiches. But I would say that, of those that have taken me seriously, I tend to see conflict between short-term and long-term thinking, right? I mean, the CMOs have the shortest tenure of any role in the C-suite, and they're there to make sure they're driving that immediate measurable success. CEOs are focused on the visioning, and that can cause conflict. There's also just the tension between operational and creative, tension over budget, right? How am I supposed to make the sales happen if I don't have the budget to make the sales happen? And then I think ultimately aligning on what does success look like, which I think is the question everyone needs to answer at the C-suite before they can start pointing those fingers.
Rob, I have to fact check you on the shortest tenure stat. That's not true. They don't have the shortest tenure. And we covered that in a podcast. They do have a very short tenure compared to other roles.
Come on, they have a reputation for having it.
Yes.
So if I spread a little rumor, it's all good.
That's the opposite of the show, this podcast purpose. But that's interesting. I liked what you both had to say. I think sometimes maybe this depends on how like marketing driven a company is too. Like some companies don't even have like the CMO role, and maybe the marketing team is not so much responsible for business growth. But I'm thinking if you are a company that's driven by marketing, having a really strong CMO CEO relationship is only going to help. But as Rob just mentioned, that's not always the case. Typically, if a CMO is departing, if things aren't going well, that relationship probably isn't as strong as it could be. So let's talk about more of kind of the downsides here. What are some signs? And I'll ask you, Ange, this. What are some signs that a disconnect might be happening, or what might that disconnect look like?
I think there are probably some that surface repeatedly that kind of stand out as indicators of a disconnect, or can potentially be indications that a CEO isn't thinking of marketing as a strategy, but maybe more of a tactic. Maybe back to your point, are they more sales driven, or they're just more operationally kind of focused in their mindset? I think if you notice that the CEO's strategic focus doesn't align with the marketing initiatives that are being pursued, obviously that's a red flag. The CEO is pushing for immediate revenue growth, but the CMO is focused on long-term brand building without kind of clear short-term impact metrics. When the CMO struggles to articulate marketing's impact in terms of business outcomes, or when the CEO shows little interest in understanding marketing metrics beyond those basic sales figures, that can be a clear sign of disconnect. I think if the CMO is consistently left out of high-level strategic discussions, sometimes we hear that. What are we really trying to do as a business? What are some of the biggest mountains to climb as a business? And how can marketing play into those? But again, back to your point, they're being relegated down to, well, it's just drive immediate traffic, or it's just build brand awareness. The other thing that we see on occasion is just really siloed thinking. When marketing operates in isolation without integration into other business functions, that can be an indication that the CEO really hasn't fostered a marketing-centric growth strategy.
It reminds me a little bit of, we had our CFO on the podcast now a while ago, but we were talking about the relationship between the CFO and marketing. And one thing he said was that it's about like speaking each other's language, like the CMO understanding what the CFO is interested in, but the CFO also taking some responsibility for understanding how marketing looks at things. Seems like a lot of it comes down to that communication, and both the CEO and the CMO being willing to learn what the other is interested in and align with business goals. And when that's not happening, that's a sign that things are not going to continue to go well. I wanted to talk a little bit about one of the things that came up in that podcast, which was the challenge with the fragmentation of the CMO role, because I wonder if that's had a bit of an impact on how the CEOs think about marketing and how they just set expectations for the marketing role, because it can vary so much. So Rob, I know that you love a fun job title. When you moved over to Misfits and Machines, I don't remember what it was, but I know you wanted some different fun.
Wanted head of mischief, yes.
Head of mischief, yes. Okay. So you got
Absolutely.
Chief Product Architect, which is still fun, but not quite head of mischief. So do you agree with McKinsey that all these new sort of titles for a CMO, are they a problem, a distraction, like titles like Chief Growth Officer, Chief Digital Officer, etc.?
I mean, I know McKinsey, they're a smart group of people, but I would disagree with them on this one. I think marketing is a giant fat word. And yes, I recognize marketing architects is our name. So I'm not throwing shade at that. But I think marketing is very ambiguous. I love the quote someone said that really everyone's job in an organization is marketing. I think that's so true. And therefore, it makes it that much more ambiguous to go, okay, well, what does the chief marketing person do? And, at the end of the day, anything that provides clarity I think will help the whole organization. I think it'll help that CEO CMO relationship if there's clarity. So if your title is Chief Increase Revenue by 10% or you're fired officer, I think that's great. I think that provides that kind of clarity. So I'm not going to throw shade at Chief Revenue Officer, Chief Growth, as long as it's providing true clarity in how that person delivers value to the organization. Great.
I suppose I haven't seen any data showing that someone with a title like Chief Growth Officer leaves their role sooner.
It's hard though. I was actually, believe it or not, was thinking of a sports analogy for this. And you know how I love sports, but nobody really doubts what the quarterback's role is. I was just thinking about that. Like their job isn't to win the game. Their job is to move the ball down the field, right? That's clarity. And then my analogy started to fall apart because I'm like, I think quarterbacks like are always arguing with the coach, right? On what the right play strategy is. So even there it's confusing, right? So just how do we really drill down and know who owns what part of the equation?
But is that getting to the root of it, Rob, in that do CMOs more need to be arguing about what the right play is for growth? Arguing with the CEO, I mean, about what that right play for growth is. Does this boil back to, is everyone aligned on how a business grows, the importance of reach, et cetera? Like if those conversations aren't happening, you could see how it's really easy to be disconnected and to have marketing relegated down to a tactic.
I would agree. I mean, I think everybody has a role in arguing about how are we going to win, no matter what your role, right? That's just everybody should have their eye on that prize. But what levers you control to create that growth is, I think, where creating some clarity can help.
Yeah, that's like kind of an interesting thought, like whose responsibility is it? Now I'm getting stuck in this quarterback analogy, Rob. I don't feel like this is helping me because now I'm thinking about, well,
it's a terrible analogy. It fell apart. I have no right to use sports analogies.
I'm just thinking about like with the quarterback, sometimes they're too kind of free flowing. Maybe this is how it could work. For example, Aaron Rodgers would complain about him is that he takes over. He starts making all the calls. It kind of becomes his offense. But you also don't want the opposite where they're always just waiting for what the coach is going to say. Like the quarterback needs to have an ability to adjust and communicate. And so maybe that's sort of the balance. And really great quarterbacks are bringing ideas. They're bringing solutions. Like they're on the front lines, really seeing what's happening. But then the coach or the CEO is kind of the conductor behind it. Well, we've covered why this disconnect is a problem, how you might identify it. Let's talk about solutions. There are probably endless strategies we could talk about for improving your communication, setting the right goals, etc. So I want to try to keep this practical. What I thought we could do is we could each share a few things that we feel are important for maintaining a strong CEO-CMO relationship and how it might look in practice. So Ange, do you want to get us started?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think this one is just like a obvious one, but you need strategic alignment about what the business is trying to do. If we have marketing thought of as a tactic within an organization and they're not at that table, that's going to fall apart immediately. So this can take shape in a variety of forms, scheduling monthly or quarterly meetings specifically dedicated to aligning these marketing strategies with overall what the business is trying to do. I think they should go beyond tactical discussions. They should be focused on how marketing initiatives will move the needle across the board, not just traffic, leads, lifetime value, but can we have a broader discussion around employee retention, et cetera? So kind of stretching beyond what marketing, I think, is traditionally thought of, accountable for, responsible for, having those key performance indicators that both the CEO and the CMO agree to, obviously will be critical for the business. I think too, encouraging your CMO or your marketing team to participate in non-marketing meetings as well, just to get a broader understanding of what the business is doing. We have clients, several of them actually, that have a rotational strategy where folks are expected to rotate around the organization and get a better understanding of what does supply chain look like, what does finance look like, product, et cetera. So I think that can only help them be more effective. And then, setting up joint innovation projects where perhaps the CEO and the CMO can work together to tackle a specific business challenge. This could be a new product launch or entering a new market. I think thinking new market with marketing helps. Be at that strategic table, working side by side on projects like that, I think can significantly strengthen that relationship.
It's hard to follow that up. Those are really good, Angela. I'm actually going to punt on this question. Like I punt on every question. No, if I had the role of CMO, I would get in a room with the CEO and we would not leave until we have defined what marketing is to him or her and to that organization. And I think everything else solves itself. But getting that clarity, and I know I'm repeating myself from what I said earlier, but I still come back to that kind of clarity, that kind of definition. Every organization is going to look at marketing differently. Every organization is going to execute marketing differently. And I want to get inside of the CEO's head and hear from her what marketing is. And even at that point, if I don't agree with him or her, I'm going to get clarity and argue with her until we can walk out of that room with a shared understanding and a shared agreement. And then I'm going to start my role as CMO.
I think that's a great one, Rob, because if you think about the CMO having so many different job titles, where else does that happen in the C-suite, where you have all these different options? And that's because the role can change so much according to the company or even the individual of the CEO and what they're looking at marketing for. So you might come in as the chief marketing officer and be doing a great job as a chief brand officer, but they really wanted a chief growth officer. And so you might just be set up to fail if you're not aligned on how they're looking at marketing. That's one of the struggles with marketing, is that it can mean a lot of different things to different people. Those are all great ones. Mine are a little bit similar to Ange. One is just over communicating and sharing results openly and frequently. I think that's something that as a marketer myself, I've learned it helps to do, instead of just lamenting when people don't understand what marketing's doing, or, oh, we're not appreciated and they don't see it. Like, well, everyone has their own jobs and their own stuff that's going on. And it's not always really obvious, like the positive things that are happening from marketing. So one practical thing we've done is like quarterly reports that go to our C-suite here at Marketing Architects with summaries of what we've done, what the results have been, annual plans that we share very openly with the rest of the agency, just trying to be transparent about how things are going. And then secondly, another thing I was thinking about was similar to what Ange said, which is going beyond just marketing communications into company strategy. And I know that Mark Ritson feels really passionately about that if marketing is going to succeed, you have to be more than just comms. You have to have a hand in the product, the positioning. In my case, it's working really closely with sales. Like, I'm not just responsible for those front end nice metrics. If stuff doesn't make it all the way through the funnel, then it doesn't really matter what marketing's doing. So in order to have that influence, you have to get beyond sort of the make it pretty department, which is not always easy to do. But Andrew mentioned things like employee retention, and there's so much more that marketing could do. So being strategic about that, I think, is helpful.
Those are great ones. You do a really good job of that.
Yeah, it's a little hard being on this podcast with my CEO. I'm like, oh, I better say the right thing here. I was thinking about that before. I'm like, oh gosh, I'd say it's going fine. Okay, I have a game to wrap up the show today. And I'm calling it, whose idea was it? CEO versus CMO edition. So I'm going to share some well-known business strategies or decisions. You should be familiar with these. And you two will guess whether it was led by a CEO or a CMO.
Did you hear that, Rob? We're being judged. She said we should be familiar with these.
I got my hand on the buzzer right now, just waiting.
Well, yeah, I don't know if you'll be familiar with like who it came from, but you'll recognize what happened. All right. So here's the first one. In 2009, this leader famously shifted Apple's focus away from traditional advertising towards more memorable product launch events, which helped to build anticipation and exclusivity around those releases.
Well, that was the CEO.
Yeah, you're right.
I wasn't even going to guess. That was Apple, so I just got to let Rob take that one.
Technically, it was the interim CEO at the time.
Wow, I should have known the Apple one. That's a softball for Rob. All right, next one. This leader pushed for Coca-Cola's Share a Coke campaign. If we remember that was when all the bottles had people's names on them. It led to a massive boost in sales, lots of social media engagement. What do we think, CEO or CMO?
I'm going to go CMO on that one.
Me too.
You're correct. That was Jonathan Mildenhall, the CMO of Coca-Cola. All right, next. This leader famously led the decision to rebrand Dunkin' Donuts to simply Dunkin'.
It's so obvious. It makes me wonder whether or not it was the CMO.
Oh, wow. That's not obvious to me, but okay.
I mean, typically branding would be...
I thought Ben Affleck did it, so I guess this is good.
That's a pretty big move. I'll go CEO on that one.
Yeah, that's where I was thinking too.
You're right. It was the CEO, David Hoffman, CEO of Dunkin'. All right. This leader launched the Like a Girl campaign for Always, transforming it from more of a product-focused message in their advertising into a movement about female empowerment.
I love this one. I actually don't know the right answer, but I loved that campaign so much. I've talked to Rob about it 95 times. I'm going to go CMO on this one.
Yeah, I didn't like that campaign. CMO.
Well, it wasn't for you, Rob. So you're right. It was a CMO, Fama Francisco, the CMO of P&G. Last one. This leader made the call to move Netflix away from DVD rentals to a subscription-based streaming service.
Well, that was CEO.
Gotta be.
Yeah, CEO, Reed Hastings. Wow, you did better than I thought you would.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the lesson is that it's not always obvious. Like marketing, the CEO, the CMO, oftentimes like they could both be making decisions or proposing campaigns that could have broad, impacts on the business. So that just proves like some CMOs can kind of go beyond their role. But
Absolutely. Good examples.
Really good.
that's it for this episode of The Marketing Architects. We'd like to thank Taylor De Los Reyes for producing the show. You can connect with us on LinkedIn, and if you like the podcast, please leave us a review. Now go forth and build great marketing.
The CMO, though, can't do that without the CEO's decision.
Well, right. It affects everything. So something like that, no question, would have to go through the CEO.
Still the single throat to choke.
Single throat to choke.
Just tell myself that every single day, Rob.
Yeah.
Marketing Architects.